The official report would later state the incident began at 11:58 p.m. on a quiet, tree-lined street in the affluent suburb of Crestwood. The subject was the Honorable David Sterling, a United States District Judge for the Southern District, a man who had spent 2 decades interpreting the very laws that were about to be used against him. He was standing on his own property, wearing a silk robe over his pajamas, in the process of wheeling a large blue recycling bin to the curb for morning pickup. The officer was Keith Miller, a 5-year veteran of the Crestwood Police Department with 2 prior excessive force complaints that had been quietly dismissed. Officer Miller, conducting a routine patrol, observed what he would later describe in his falsified report as a suspicious male loitering in a high-value residential area. He initiated a stop. There had been number 911 call, no report of a prowler, no actual crime in progress. The only catalyst was the sight of a black man existing in a space the officer had prejudged he did not belong. The bodycam footage, time-stamped and activated the moment Officer Miller stepped out of his patrol car, captured every word of the encounter that would end one man's career and expose the fragile barrier between order and oppression. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the serene darkness of the neighborhood, painting streaks of color across the manicured lawn and the stately brick facade of Judge Sterling's home. The audio crackled to life with the sound of a car, doors shutting, and heavy boots on asphalt. "Hey, you, stop right there. Hands where I can see 'em." The voice was sharp, laced with an unearned authority that grated against the midnight quiet. Judge Sterling paused, his hand still resting on the handle of the recycling bin. He turned slowly, his expression one of weary patience rather than alarm. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, not in surrender, but in a gesture of placating transparency. The beam of a high-powered flashlight pinned him, erasing his features in a blinding white glare. "Can I help you, officer?" Sterling's voice was calm, a deep baritone that carried the weight of countless courtroom proceedings. It was a voice accustomed to commanding respect, not begging for it. Officer Miller strode across the lawn, his posture aggressive, his hand hovering near the grip of his service weapon. The bodycam swayed with his confident gait. He was younger than the judge, with a buzz cut and a jaw set in a permanent sneer of suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Miller demanded, his eyes sweeping from Sterling's face to the expensive home behind him, the calculation obvious. Sterling gestured with his head toward the bin. "I'm taking out the recycling. Collection is tomorrow morning." He offered a simple, truthful explanation, the kind an innocent man gives without a second thought. Miller scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Taking out the recycling? At midnight? You think I'm stupid?" The flashlight beam dipped, illuminating the judge's silk robe and bare ankles above a pair of leather slippers. "Whose house is this?" The question was an accusation. Sterling's patience began to fray at the edges, but his voice remained level. "It's my house. I live here. My name is David Sterling." He didn't offer his title. In that moment, on his own lawn, he felt he shouldn't have to. He was a citizen, a homeowner, and that should have been enough. Miller took another step closer, invading his personal space. The smell of stale coffee and chewing gum wafted from the officer. "I'm going to need to see some ID, David." He said the name with a mocking emphasis, as if it were an alias. Sterling drew a slow breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. He was now not just a homeowner, but a teacher, forced to give a lesson he'd hoped he'd never have to. "Officer, with all due respect, I'm on my own private property. Under Terry versus Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime to demand my identification. Taking out my own recycling bin doesn't meet that standard." The legal precision in his words seemed to enrage Miller rather than inform him. The officer saw it not as a statement of rights, but as a challenge to his authority. "Oh, we got ourselves a street lawyer, do we?" Miller's voice dripped with condescension. "You watch a couple of cop shows, and now you know the law? Let me explain how it works out here. I see someone who doesn't look like he belongs, lurking around $1 million home in the middle of the night. I get to ask questions, and you have to answer them. Now show me your ID, or I'm taking you downtown for obstruction." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. Across the street, a bedroom light flickered on in the house of Sterling's neighbor, Mrs. Gable. A curtain twitched. They were being watched. Sterling knew this was a critical juncture. He could acquiesce, produce the ID from his wallet inside, and end this humiliating charade. It would be the easier path, but it would also be a betrayal of every principle he had built his life and career upon. He was not just David Sterling, a black man being harassed in his own yard. He was Judge Sterling, a guardian of the Constitution, and the man in front of him was actively violating it. "Officer," Sterling said, his voice now taking on a new edge of command, the calm patience replaced by a steely resolve. "You are conducting an unlawful stop. You have no legal basis to demand my papers. I am not required to identify myself, and threatening me with arrest for invoking my Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights is a gross abuse of your authority." Miller's face, illuminated by the bounce back of his own flashlight, twisted into a mask of fury. "That's it. You're done. Turn around." Hands behind your back, he reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the silent night. The officer was crossing a line from which there would be no easy return. He was escalating a baseless encounter into a physical confrontation. Sterling didn't move. He stood his ground, a pillar of defiance against the tide of uniformed ignorance. "If you put your hands on me, officer, you will be committing assault and battery, in addition to unlawful detention." As Miller lunged forward, grabbing Sterling's arm in a tight, painful grip, the judge's entire demeanor shifted. The quiet dignity hardened into something formidable, something absolute. The man in the silk robe vanished, and the federal judge took his place. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more power than any shout. He had read the officer's name tag in the flashlight's glare. "You have made a catastrophic error in judgment, and I assure you, you will be held accountable for it." The officer's laugh was brittle, a sound of pure arrogance. "You think your little law school lecture is going to save you? You're just another punk who needs to be taught a lesson." He began to twist Sterling's arm behind his back. It was in that moment of physical contact, of illegal force, that the power dynamic of the entire universe seemed to bend and then shatter. Sterling spoke again, his voice devoid of any emotion except for a chilling certainty. "I am not a punk. I am not a street lawyer. I am United States District Judge David Sterling, and you are detaining a federal judicial officer on his own property without cause, an act that carries severe state and federal penalties." For a split second, Miller froze. His brain tried to process the information, but his prejudice was a thick filter. He saw the man's race, his casual attire, and his defiance, and it was an impossible equation to solve. Disbelief won out. "A judge?" he spat out, a contemptuous smirk returning to his face. "Yeah, right. And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Nice try, buddy. You're just making this worse for yourself." He cinched the first handcuff onto Sterling's wrist, the cold metal biting into his skin. The click was a definitive, damning sound. Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't struggle. He simply looked past Miller, toward the growing number of lights now on in the neighboring houses. He saw the faint blue glow of a cell phone screen recording from a second-story window. The witnesses were gathering. He then looked directly into the lens of the body camera, knowing it was his most crucial witness. "Let the record show," he said, his voice resonating with the formal cadence of a courtroom declaration, "that Officer Keith Miller, badge number 724 of the Crestwood Police Department, is effecting a false arrest. Let it also show that I am now informing him of my official capacity." He turned his gaze back to Miller, whose smugness was beginning to be pricked by a tiny needle of doubt. The man's composure was unnatural. He wasn't scared. He was documenting. "Officer," Sterling said calmly, "in the left pocket of my robe, you will find my wallet. I am verbally authorizing you to retrieve it. Inside, you will find my Federal Judicial Commission card, issued by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts." The sheer specificity of the statement gave Miller pause. The confidence with which it was delivered was unnerving. He hesitated, his hand still gripping Sterling's cuffed wrist. The smirk on his face faltered. "What kind of game are you playing?" he muttered, but the bravado was gone, replaced by a nascent tremor of uncertainty. "It's no game," Sterling replied. "Check the wallet. Or don't. Either way, this encounter is over. The only question that remains is the severity of the consequences for you." A long, tense silence stretched out. The only sounds were the hum of the patrol car's engine and the distant bark of a dog. Miller, with a flicker of indecision, made the choice that would seal his fate. He was still in control, he told himself. He would call this man's bluff and then charge him with impersonating a public official on top of everything else. Keeping a firm grip on Sterling's arm, he awkwardly reached into the robe's pocket with his free hand. He pulled out a fine leather wallet. He flipped it open. The body cam pointed down, capturing the view over Miller's shoulder. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license. It was a dark blue card, embossed with a golden eagle, the seal of the United States Judiciary. The text was stark and undeniable. The Honorable David Sterling, it read. United States District Judge. Below the name and title was a photograph of the man standing before him, albeit wearing judicial robes instead of silk pajamas. The world stopped. The audio on the body cam picked up the sound of Miller's sharp intake of breath. His hand, as if shocked by an electric current, flew off Sterling's arm. The half-applied handcuff dangled uselessly from the judge's wrist. Miller stumbled back a step, his face, now starkly visible in the ambient light from the house's porch lamp, was a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant enforcer had vanished, replaced by a terrified man who had just realized he hadn't just pulled over a citizen. He had assaulted a foundational pillar of the American legal system. "Oh my God," Miller whispered. The words were a prayer, but it was far too late for salvation. He looked from the ID card back to the judge's face. The cold, unwavering stare he received offered no comfort, no forgiveness. I didn't. Sir, he stammered, his mind racing to find an excuse, a way to undo the last 10 minutes. But the machinery of justice, once set in motion, is relentless. Judge Sterling, with a deliberate motion, used his free hand to undo the single cuff on his wrist and let it drop to the grass with a soft thud. He held out the open wallet so the body camera could get a clear, prolonged view of his credentials. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice now like chips of ice. "I want you to get on your radio right now and request that your immediate supervisor and the shift commander report to my location." Immediately, Miller was frozen, his mind a maelstrom of fear. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. That is not a request." The judge cut him off, his authority absolute. "That is a direct order. You will do it now. You will then stand by your vehicle, and you will not speak another word to me until they arrive." He then turned slightly. "And you will ensure that your body-worn camera and the dash camera from your vehicle continue to record. Do you understand me?" Miller, trembling, could only nod mutely. He fumbled for the radio on his shoulder, his hands shaking so badly he could barely key the microphone. As Miller made the choked, frantic call for his supervisors, Judge Sterling calmly retrieved his own cell phone from his other pocket. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a name. The person on the other end answered on the first ring. "Marshal," Sterling said, his voice steady. "It's Judge Sterling. I'm at my home address. I've just been unlawfully detained by an officer of the Crestwood Police Department. I need you to send a team here to secure evidence, specifically the officer's body camera and vehicle footage." "Yes. The situation is under control, but the chain of custody needs to be impeccable." The arrival of Sergeant Wallace, Miller's direct supervisor, was a study in controlled panic. He found one of his officers, Keith Miller, standing ramrod straight and pale as a ghost by his patrol car, and a man in a silk robe, who he immediately recognized from local news as Federal Judge David Sterling, standing calmly on the lawn. The dangling handcuff on the grass told a story that made Wallace's stomach clench. The conversation was brief and one-sided. Judge Sterling laid out the facts without emotion, a simple recitation of events. He pointed to the curtain-twitching neighbors. "I believe you'll find several witnesses who can corroborate the duration and nature of this stop. My security cameras will also have captured the entire event. Within 30 minutes, the quiet suburban street looked like a major crime scene. 2 more Crestwood police cars arrived, along with 2 black sedans carrying U.S. Marshals. The shift commander, a lieutenant named Peterson, arrived and immediately placed Officer Miller on administrative leave, confiscating his badge and weapon on the spot. He was escorted from the scene like a criminal. The U.S. Marshals, acting on the judge's authority, took possession of the body cam and the dash cam's data card, ensuring the local department could not tamper with the evidence. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Officer Miller and the Crestwood Police Department. Judge Sterling, while the victim, maintained a professional distance, recusing himself from any official role in the case. He didn't need one. He had set the wheels of a much larger system in motion. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District launched a federal civil rights investigation. The bodycam footage was leaked to the press, and the story exploded. It was a perfect, damning narrative. A respected black federal judge, racially profiled and assaulted on his own property by a white police officer. The footage was played on every national news network. The audio of Miller's condescending taunts, followed by his panicked stammering, became a viral symbol of prejudice meeting power. The Crestwood Police Department was buried under an avalanche of public outrage. The 2 prior complaints against Miller were reopened and found to have been improperly dismissed. The police chief issued a public apology to Judge Sterling, which the judge politely but coolly acknowledged was insufficient. True accountability, he noted in a public statement, was not found in press conferences, but in courtrooms. Officer Keith Miller was fired within the week, but his problems were just beginning. A federal grand jury indicted him on 2 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, a felony under 18 U.S. C. Section 242, and falsification of a police report, as his initial, hastily written report wildly contradicted the video evidence. The trial was short. The prosecution's case was built around the unassailable evidence of the bodycam footage. They played the entire 10-minute encounter for the jury. Miller's defense attorney tried to argue that it was a simple misunderstanding, that his client was acting in good faith to investigate a potential burglary. But the prosecutor, in her closing argument, eviscerated that claim. Good faith? She asked the jury, her voice ringing with indignation. Was it good faith to mock Judge Sterling when he asserted his constitutional rights? Was it good faith to threaten him with obstruction for simply existing on his own property? Was it good faith to put his hands on a man and cuff him without a shred of probable cause? No, that wasn't good faith. That was bigotry. It was an abuse of a sacred trust. Keith Miller did not see a homeowner. He saw a black man, and he decided that man was a criminal. He wrapped his prejudice in a badge and a uniform and used it as a weapon. The neighbors, including Mrs. Gable, testified. They spoke of how often they saw Judge Sterling, a friendly, quiet man, working in his yard or walking his dog. They confirmed there had been no disturbance, nothing suspicious, until the police car arrived. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing took place 6 months after that night on the lawn. The courtroom was packed. Keith Miller, now a convicted felon in a cheap suit, stood before a different judge. Judge Sterling was not present, but he had submitted a victim impact statement that was read aloud by the prosecutor. In it, he did not speak of his own humiliation or anger. He spoke of the law. The badge is not a shield for prejudice, the statement read. It is a symbol of public trust. When an officer violates that trust, he not only harms the individual he targets, but he corrodes the foundation of our entire justice system. He breeds distrust and fear in the very communities he is sworn to protect. The law must apply to everyone, but it must apply with special force to those who are entrusted to enforce it. For there to be justice, there must be accountability. The presiding judge looked down at a pale, weeping Keith Miller. Mr. Miller, the judge said, his voice stern, you took an oath to uphold the law. Instead, you became a lawbreaker. You used your authority not to protect a citizen, but to persecute him based on the color of his skin. This court must send a message that such conduct will not be tolerated. He then delivered the sentence, 72 months in federal prison. 6 years. A gasp went through the courtroom. It was a severe sentence, far exceeding what many expected, but it was a just one. As the news broke, a sense of vindication settled over the community. The system, so often criticized for protecting its own, had been forced to act. A man with immense power had used it not for revenge, but to demand the accountability that so many others are denied. Late one evening, a few weeks later, Judge Sterling stood by his window, looking out at the quiet street. The recycling bins were lined up at the curb for the next day's collection. Everything looked the same as it had on that fateful night, but something had fundamentally changed. A line had been drawn, a precedent set. He knew this one case wouldn't solve the systemic issues of bias in policing. But for one officer, on one night, the law had been absolute. And for a brief, clear moment, justice had been served.